Hey, it is Zennial Gamer. So first and foremost, let's go ahead and look at our type artifacts. We're going to look at all the artifacts. Now, I will say that for attack artifacts, I heavily favor plus attack, and then I do like HP as well. I'm not as big of a fan of defense on attack artifacts. There are some exceptions. For example, Perna can use defense because her base defense is so low. She gets incredible proportionate value, but usually speaking, Perna is not meant to take that many hits anyway, and I'd still prefer to have attack or maybe HP on her. So with my attack artifacts, I look first and foremost for attack, secondarily for HP, and then the defense just once in a while. If I need it to balance out a build, it's okay. When it comes to my defense artifacts, I look first and foremost for defense, second for HP, and attack once in a while if I need it to balance out my builds. Now when we talk about sub-properties, again, we're going to be looking at valuing sub-properties slightly different for each type of artifact. So for example, anything crit damage based, and I clicked on a really good random example right there, anything crit damage based is awesome on an attack artifact, whereas recovery is very rarely useful on an attack artifact, and skill 3 recovery is completely useless on an HP artifact. There's only like 2 or 3 monsters in the entire game that are HP type monsters that heal on skill 3. Perna, interestingly enough, is one of them. Bella, the light Inagami, is another. But for the most part, HP monsters tend to get recovery only on their skill 2. So skill 1 and 3 recovery, not very good on an HP artifact, but very good on a support artifact. Obviously, that's where you get your Mollies, your Aerials, your Lulus, things like that. So skill 3 recovery, amazing on a support artifact, but not super good on an HP artifact. Now, remembering all these little niche things, like which artifacts have the best skill 2 recovery, skill 1 recovery, and stuff, that gets really complicated. That's why I suggest that process of filling up your artifact inventory and then looking for the artifact that best suits the monster instead of the other way around. I think a lot of times you wind up getting your best fits for the monsters when you do it that way. Now, on support artifacts, I tend to highly value anything with damage reduction, skill 3 recovery, skill 2 recovery, skill 3 and skill 2 accuracy. Those are the things I value most on support. On defense and attack artifacts, I tend to value anything that's going to give me additional offense, usually a lot of crit damage type stuff. HP artifacts, also mostly kind of crit damage type stuff. Now, for our attribute artifacts, it's harder to narrow down. Most of the sub-properties can have different values because attribute doesn't really tell you as much about a monster as type does. But the one thing I will say is I tend to always value the most whenever you get damage reduction or damage increases from your opposite element. So for example, this fire artifact right here, it's an attack-based artifact that does additional damage on fire. So that's not the opposite element, it's the same element, which is useful, but it's not amazing, because if I were to use that, I would have to remember which monster it's on. And then we have a damage reduction from wind, which is mostly useless, because we have attribute advantage over wind, and we have a damage received from fire, which is, again, can be useful, but I would have to remember that it's there. So to me, this artifact, it's an attack artifact without really any great offensive stats, and then the damage reductions are not from monsters that are going to hit me by computer AI. In RTA, in theory, there are some fire monsters that you might bring in to counter other fire monsters. So if you're building a specific counter in RTA, fire to counter fire, then this artifact could have some value if you rolled it out and tried to triple roll on the damage received from fire. But outside of that specific niche RTA counter, this artifact really doesn't have that. I guess also in guild content or RTA, you may be bringing in fire to kill fire. Maybe you're using, off the top of my head, a route or Daphnis. There you go. Maybe you consistently use Daphnis to kill Yogun. So if that's the case, then you might roll for multi-damage on fire. But then, of course, you always have to remember that your Daphnis has additional damage on fire, and he's meant to counter that specific monster. Whereas if we had additional damage on wind, then we would always, like, if we're consistent with that among all our fire monsters, then we know that we're always getting that additional damage. Now, this artifact, wow, this must be like one of my very first artifacts. Let's go ahead and just sell this right on stream. That is like the worst artifact ever. That's probably why I was plus 15 in inventory. Anyway, so for our support, tankier, bruiser type monsters, I value damage reductions from the opposite element. For our offensive type monsters and our bruisers, I I value damage boosting on the opposite element. But generally speaking, for the most part, I value additional damage by X and crit damage more than either of those because it's got like a broader usage. So I tend to focus more on those stats. Hey guys, we're gonna take a 90-second ad break, and I will ask you guys, if you enjoy the content, please watch through, support the promoted videos because it helps me out as a creator. But also because I promise you guys I will only ever take promoted content for games that I enjoy or for something that I think can help the viewers. Now, today's promoted content is actually in that second category. I'm excited to announce that my agreement with Huawei App Gallery has been extended for 1 month, which means that all of you guys who are looking for discounts on Summoner's War packs will be able to continue to get amazing discounts for another month. For example, something like these sick transmog packs that you see in front of you, which I'm about to buy right now. You guys can get 10% cashback points on every single pack you buy, so that means if you were to just buy one transmog, you would get $3 cashback credited to your next purchase. But the exciting part that's only available through my partnership with Huawei App Galleries is that you can also get daily coupons. So those coupons can be worth up to another 24% off. The coupons can be as high as 24 euros on a 100 euro pack. There is a link which I've got posted on screen and I've also got in the video description. All you've got to do is click that link each day because there are new coupons each day. Clip whichever coupons you want and you've got an entire week to use them. Guys, I am also going to put a link on screen to a video that shows you completely how to install the app gallery and how to really take advantage of this promotion. With that, let's take a quick look at the Tmog and then back to the video. Alright guys, here it is. I even had the old Tmog, but bro, that's just so sick. So, crit damage is still king for most of your pure offensive monsters, and then crit damage has one place where it has an even bigger advantage, which is when you're using crit rate runes. So remember that all of your damage calculations are based on multipliers. You take your damage formula, which is, just for simplest sake, let's say it's 500% of your attack, right? So you take 500% of your attack, and then if you crit, you multiply it by crit damage plus 100%. So like if you have 150 crit damage, the actual math formula is 500% of attack times 250 because you do your normal damage plus the 150 crit damage. Anyway, if you're running a crit rate rune, that usually means you have a lower crit damage, but you have a higher base damage number. You're running a crit rate rune so you can have more stats on the monster. So now, let's say your crit damage build is 500% of 2,000. You know, your Lucian has 2,000 attack. The multiplier, we're just pretending it's 500%. That means it's 10,000 damage, and then you multiply that by 250 for your crit damage, and it's 25,000. But what if you're running a crit rate rune, but now you've got 3,000 attack? So you take 500% times 3,000 is 15,000. You multiply it by 150% with that no crit damage, and it's 22,500. So it's less damage using that crit rate rune and changing it out for an attack rune, but now you add in a bunch of crit damage on your sub-properties, and you're multiplying that bigger base number by the crit damage, which is scaling up more in proportion. So, for example, if you have 240 crit damage and you get 20% skill 3 crit damage, you haven't really added that much in proportion. But if you have 50 crit damage and you had 20% skill 3 crit damage, you've added 40% more of the crit damage that you had. I'll probably try and hopefully I remember to put some on-screen graphics for this because that was a lot of numbers. But the big takeaway here is simply that crit damage is going to be the best thing that you can get on your sub-properties here if it goes to your primary damage hits on your primary damage dealers and bruisers. And then you get even more benefit from it when you're running a low crit damage, high crit rate unit than you do if you're running a higher crit damage unit to begin with. Recovery skills, they're pretty self-explanatory. I value skill 2 and 3 a lot. Skill 1, there's not a lot of monsters that do skill 1 recovery. Shaman and Lulu, and maybe some of the other 2A Howls. I'm sure there might be 1 or 2 at John, maybe, so there's a couple out there. But most skill 1 recovery multipliers tend to be really low. Jean is 10% heal, so if I get a 10% skill 1 recovery, it's now only 11% heal. It's just not as much value. Whereas a skill 3 recovery, it rolls to the same ratio, but most monsters have a much higher skill 3 recovery. Molly is 20% on her recovery. Tetra is 10% of her own health, which is, for a lot of monsters, 30% or higher. Ariel is insane, like 50%. Shushu, 75%. So when you multiply all of those big numbers, you're getting so much more value out of it. So I don't tend to really value skill 1 recovery at all, because very few monsters have it, and the monsters that do don't actually heal all that much with it. But skill 2 and skill 3 recovery is very valuable. Accuracy, mostly the same story. There are some monsters with skill 1 defense break, and that's really important. There's a few monsters with skill 1 stuns, and those are really important. Most monsters, though, their skill 1 debuff is not as important to land as their skill 2 and their skill 3 debuffs are. So I value skill 2 and skill 3 accuracy more than skill 1, but I do have some valuing for it. Same thing as with recovery. Additional attack proportional to lost HP. This is useful for a few monsters in the game. A lot of us overlook it, but especially since they buffed it so that it can roll higher, this is useful to monsters that are intended to play at low HP. So Miho, for example, is almost always at low HP. You gain way more value from a lot of attack proportional to lost HP on Miho than you do from like crit damage, because Miho's always attacking you when she's got 1 HP. Monsters that resurrect at low health. So the demons, for example, Belial, not all the demons do, but Belial and Beelzebub, tremendous gains for them on attack proportional to lost HP. So there's a lot of value in that. Defense proportional lost HP, I think it's mostly worthless, because I think by the time your monster is low enough to have the defense scaled up, it's probably going to die anyway, and you're not gaining value from this throughout most of your fight. Whereas with the attack plus, I wouldn't use this on a monster that's not intended to be at low health. So you could put this on a Daphnis, for example, because you know he eats 30% of his health, but I would never really want to put this on an Odin, who is often going to be playing at full health. Now with the defense plus, it's a thing where most of the time if the monster's low health, it's going to die anyway, so I just see no value in it. Speed plus proportional, again, I mean, you could put this on maybe like a Molly or some sort of other support, and there are times where it would actually play a role and help you lap, but overall I think there is an opportunity cost here. Let's say you're putting this on a Molly at the opportunity cost of much higher skill 3 recovery, where you're going to get that skill 3 recovery every single turn of every single fight, more or less, but the speed plus proportional might win you 1 fight in 500. I mean, it's just not really worthwhile. So defense plus, speed plus, I never use them unless it's just like a random sub-property I couldn't convert off. Don't find a lot of value in them, but attack plus does have its uses. Now, attack increasing effect, I used to think that this was huge. After doing some damage testing, like I said, I do think the crit damage and also some of the additional damage by X tend to matter more. But this is still a very useful one. If you're using it with a monster that you know will consistently have an attack buff. So Kali, for example, 2A Kali attack buffs herself. Anything that attack buffs themselves, Talia, anything that attack buffs themselves, it's great. Anything that you use it in a comp where you're building to cleave, it's great. I wouldn't necessarily make this my primary focus. I would want the higher rolls to go into crit damage, but then when I was converting a sub-property in, or if I was looking for a synergized artifact, this would definitely go really well with crit damage. Defense increasing effect, this is mostly going to be valuable to monsters that do defense scaling damage, so Tyrannus, Velajuel, Fang, anybody who does, Bulldozer, Copper, yeah, Bulldozer and Copper. Anybody who does defense scaling damage will do a lot more damage with this, so it does have its value and it does have its places. But in every one of those examples I just gave, with the exception of Fang, crit damage will probably give you more. So you want this to go with crit damage, but not instead of crit damage. Speed increasing effect. Everything I just said about defense increasing effect pretty much goes to speed increasing. This helps monsters with speed scaling damage. It can also help you to lap. In my G2 RTA season, I played with a team that was speed tuned around a vigor speed buff, and then all my artifacts were like speed increasing effect plus, and it allowed me to lap teams that were much faster. I played a slower, much thicker, tankier team. I used the vigor speed buff so that I could lap the faster team, and ultimately would take 8 turns in a row, even though my enemy was faster than me. That was a synergized built team meant to take advantage of this. For the most part, Speed Increasing Effect, not super valuable unless the monster gives itself a speed buff, and even then you have to be careful with your speed tuning, because if one monster has Speed Increasing Effect on its artifact and another monster doesn't, your speed tuning, your turn order may actually break after a couple of turns. Also worth noting, speed proportional to lost HP can screw with your turn orders. It's another reason that I actually don't even like to have this one on most artifacts, because it can mess up my turn orders, and you should never have this one, the speed plus proportional lost HP, on any PvE team, because it will mess up your turn orders. Speed Increasing Effects, same thing. Be careful it doesn't mess up your turn orders, and for the most part you only want to put it on monsters that speed buff or that are part of a set comp with a speed buff. Damage dealt by counterattack. It's a way to get a little extra damage on Miho, Laika, and Fang. There's really no other monster, maybe if you've got a Jaeger, I guess, but I mean there's not many monsters that will consistently counterattack, and there's not many damage dealers that consistently counterattack. So it's one of those things where if it lands on an artifact that's going on a monster that does counterattack, awesome, great, some added damage. But for the most part, it's not something I roll for or value. Damage dealt by attacking together. For me, this is primarily a PvE stat, but it's the best PvE stat for your Trikaru, for anything built around twins, for anything built around routes. The damage dealt by attacking together, it can really add up. Maybe it's not the best, but it's one of the best for them. It's something that you want on the artifacts of any Ikaru, any Rauk, any Twin. But beyond that, there's no real other monsters that attack together, so it does have limited value overall, and not a lot of value in PvP. Bomb damage, this is a nice supplemental thing to have on the artifacts for your Ciara. For the most part, you want additional damage by X for Ciara, but some additional bomb damage is helpful. And then for your bombers, your Taurus, your CN, your Dover, this is the single most important thing for each of them. This plus attack increasing effect is amazing for them. Also worth mentioning, even though I'm past it, attack increasing effect is amazing for Onimushas, who don't need a lot of sub-properties actually, since they can't crit and stuff. Attack increasing effect, single best thing for them. Crit damage received, I haven't personally tested this, so I don't know how accurate this is, but I was told that some people did some testing on Reddit and it's largely useless. My understanding of how this works is that what it does is it doesn't reduce the damage you take, it reduces the crit damage of the enemy. So if a 250 crit damage Lucian hits you and you have 9 crit damage received reduced, you're taking 9 crit damage away from the Lucian, which is a very, very small amount of damage reduced overall. It would be nice if you're countering somebody like myself who plays a lot of crit rate runes on a bruiser style. It probably has a proportionally much higher impact, but you would have to know in advance that you were facing that person, so for the most part it does have limited to no value. It's good on a rune that's all damage reduction effects. It's nice if you have like a single roll of it just added in there just because it's there, but it's not something I look for. For Life Drain, my understanding on Life Drain is that Recovery actually works on any skill, or any monster that can Life Drain gets a benefit from Recovery as well. Difference being, of course, Recovery is limited to a specific skill. Life Drain works for all of them. Life Drain is also going to roll higher percentages by default, but Recovery will ultimately give you more healing when you use the proper skill. So the best artifacts for a monster like a Miho or something that's consistently playing on Vampire, or and on Taurus that has a built-in Life Drain, you want to have both Life Drain and Recovery together to maximize that total healing, but the Life Drain does have value for those monsters. Any monster that you play on Vampire, or any monster that has some sort of built-in life draining or mechanic, you would want to use Life Drain. HP when revived, I think this is the single most useless of all of them, because if you think about monsters that self-revive, several of them are never going to be in the meta, like the Dagora and Vidor. You know, they're 3-star monsters, maybe once they're 2-aid, but right now they will never be played. Perna revives at 100% HP. The demons, Belial and Beelzebub, you do not want them to have more HP because it lowers the damage they do. So they're really, Samanth, who cares if he has some extra HP? It's totally irrelevant. So there are very few monsters that are going to actually revive and not have 100% HP and be used in the meta. And for all of them, having more HP is either it doesn't matter or it's actually a bad thing. Now, Atk Bar When Revived, I personally feel like even though they buffed it, the rolls on this are still too low. just because of the way the mechanics of Atk Bar works, it's still really hard to get ahead of your enemy. So if you have a demon, maybe if you have Samanth or Perna, those are probably, so Belial, Beelzebub, Samanth, and Perna, probably the only 4 monsters that I would even consider using this on. And in all of those cases, if you can't get them at least 20 to 30% total attack bar when revived from the 2 artifacts, I think it's worthless. But while you're getting that, which is multiple rolls, you also, all of them are damage dealers. You also need crit damage and additional damage dealing effects, which are usually more important than the attack bar when revived. So you need just like the artifact to roll perfectly. It can be nice, it can be some added synergy, but only if the artifact is rolled perfectly. Now, additional damage by X. These are pure damage. These are going to benefit multi-hitters and monsters that turn cycle and take a lot of turns more than anything else. For the most part, the math is pretty straightforward. So if it's a triple roll, additional damage proportional to HP, and it's 1%, and you have 30,000 HP, then you're doing an extra 300 damage per hit. For a monster like Oracles, if you can get 1% HP and then like 10% of attack and a few percent HP in defense, you're adding like almost 1,000 true damage, ignore defense damage per hit, which is adding 3,000 total damage, and they turn cycle and take a lot of turns, and that damage really adds up. Also, this is why Okeanos became meta, because he has multiple hits and you get him lots and lots of true damage, and then he just does so much more damage with those multiple hits. So any monster that multi-hits benefits from additional damage by X. All 4 of these are good. The dream is to get all 4 of them on one artifact, or even better, to like high quad roll one of them that suits your monster perfectly. So, you know, going back to the Oracles, if you run a tank Ciara that's 35k HP and you can quad roll a legend artifact, which would be what, 1.5% additional damage, which is 450 damage per hit, or on 500 damage per hit on 35k HP, and then on that same artifact that you quad rolled, you get some bomb damage and some skill 2 accuracy, and it's like a perfect artifact for her. Crit damage up as the enemy's HP condition is good. This is good for single target hitters that do a lot of damage. So your Odins, for example, your Coppers, for example. Crit damage up as the enemy's HP condition is bad. This is really good for multi-hitters that do big damage. So your Lucians, for example, will wind up hitting for more each card because, you know, each card hits the enemy with a lower HP status, so each card hits with more crit damage. And then single target crit damage on your skill. You know, I talked a lot about crit damage. Again, obviously a really good one for single target damage dealers. Okay guys, so that's going to be it for today's artifact video. As always guys, I appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time. Hey, it is Zenio. Oh, no, wait, this is the outro. My bad. Hey guys, if you want to see more content, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications. It's your support that makes me want to create continuing content. I thank you guys for the support, as always, and we'll see you in the next video.